to first begin by saluting you, my dear brother Nick. Who would have thought 3 years ago when we met in Washington, D.C., that you would be able to spearhead, you and Ryan and the others, and allow us to be a part of this magnificent moment, generating the kind of momentum and movement in order to transform the American empire into a more democratic space. Alongside the marvelous militancy of a moral and spiritual and political nature on the streets in the last few months, these 4.5 hours that I've been blessed to listen to every minute has been such a magnificent inspiration, because that's very much what we need. By inspiration, I don't mean just abstract projection. I mean enactment and embodiment of examples of people who have integrity, honesty, decency, courage. And that's what we heard in every voice going back to 4 o'clock. And I come from a tradition, people, black people, the grand people, producing a great tradition in which the anthem is lift every voice, not the echoes of the neo-fascist wing of the ruling class of the Republican Party, the neoliberal ruling class, neoliberal wing of the ruling class of the Democratic Party. No, that's the echo chamber. That's what we saw in those conventions. But they're talking points, but they're superficial spectacle. But no, I come from a people who believe in the funk. Allow your voice to be heard from the deepest levels and corners of the dark corner of your soul, that such that you will engage in a genuine quest for truth. And the condition of truth is always to allow suffering to speak. Everybody's suffering, no matter what color, no matter what gender, sexual orientation, no matter what national identity, and then connected to a love of beauty. And beauty is always something we grasp for in the face of terror, as Rilke taught us. And then, of course, the quest for good and wrestling with evil. And then for some of us, it's even a quest for God in the face of so many demonic and devilish forces that are shot through not just our structures and institutions, but shot through our very souls and hearts. 57 years and 3 days ago, the greatest public intellectual in the history of the American empire died in Ghana. His name was W.E.B. Du Bois. And that next morning, young brother Martin Luther King told America about a dream that he had, which was not the American dream, but a dream rooted in the American dream, and has everything to do with the movement for People's Party. Because what we're talking about here is a people who muster the wherewithal, who have not just the courage, but the fortitude to fructify. And by fructify, I mean to generate the fruits of truth-telling, to generate the truth of justice-seeking, to generate the truth of kindness and sweetness and gentleness in how we relate to each other, but with a steel spine when it comes to bearing witness in the face of oppression. That's why Du Bois raised the 4 questions. What does integrity do in the face of oppression? Oh, here's the people's movement in the People's Party. What does honesty do in the face of deception? Here is the People's Party at its best. What does decency do in the face of insult and assault? What does courage do in the face of brute force? We are living in a moment of massive imperial meltdown, spiritual breakdown, and we need prophetic fight back. And the People's Party is a prophetic fight back that, like Du Bois, believes in multiracial, multi-gender, multi-sexual orientational, multi-binary and non-binary sexual sensibilities and orientations, a solidarity with those Frantz Fanon called the wretched of the earth, that can tell the truth about America, both its best and its worst. Because let us never forget, Each and every one of us come out of various families, communities, and traditions, so we have to be true for where we come from. And I come from a people who have been on intimate terms with catastrophe. So the ecological catastrophe impending, the nuclear catastrophe that we don't like to talk about with the gangsters in Russia and the gangsters in the United States and the gangsters in other ruling elites that have the possibility of pushing buttons and blowing us all up. The economic catastrophe with unbelievably grotesque levels of wealth inequality that we hear over and over again, and the refusal to come to terms with poverty, the refusal to come to terms with working people's empowerment through unions in any means by which they can live lives of decency and dignity. The intimate forms of resistance and resilience in the face of catastrophe. 400 years of hatred. Here come love warriors like John Coltrane, Love Supreme. Here come Martin Luther King. Here come Ella Baker. Brother Biden tried to appropriate Ella Baker. Ella Baker was trying to create a third party when she met her end with Arthur Cornel and the great William Kunstler and others. Same tradition. In the face of trauma for 400 years, here comes healing. Not just Aretha Franklin, not just Erykah Badu, not just Kendrick Lamar, but a whole wave of voices in churches, in mosques, in synagogues, secular forms, trying to heal folk, to empower folk. Why? Because just like our moment, we all wonder. This is Marcus Garvey's question. Does America even have the capacity to treat the masses of black people with decency and dignity? Not just make room for the black bourgeoisie and the exceptional Negroes who view themselves as exceptional, who are highly educated. I'm talking about the masses of black people. And we raise that question for the masses of poor people, the masses of indigenous people, the masses of Asians, the masses of Chicanos and Browns, the masses of all working and poor people here and abroad. The American empire at its best articulates the vision of a sly stone. Everyday people ought to have a dignity and decency. The vision of a James Cleveland. Ordinary people ought to have a dignity and decency. Emerson agrees. Whitman agrees. Gene O'Neill agrees with his indictment in The Iceman Cometh. Toni Morrison agrees. But does America have the capacity? We're all wrestling with despair. That's the skeleton in our closet. We're living in a fascist moment, escalating, crystallizing, consolidating, solidifying. And that's the worst of America. Here comes the People's Party. And let us listen to what Edward Said has to say about precious Palestinian brothers and sisters that never loses sight of the humanity of Jewish brothers and sisters, understands the 2,000 years of Jewish humanity being trashed and hated, and yet even our Jewish brothers and sisters in their right-wing forms have the capacity to dominate and occupy other people. Yes, they're human beings just like anybody else. That has a spiritual component to it and a moral element to it, but it's political in bringing all of us together. Can we listen to Dorothy Day? Can we listen to Cesar Chavez? Can we listen to Ward Churchill? Can we listen to all of our voices, Grace Boggs and others, the best of who we are as a species, as a nation, as an imperial experiment, as an imperial democracy? And yet, as my dear sister Marianne said, recognize that there's the best in America that has always understood that if our lives matter, if black lives matter, we're going to have to make sure that democratic practices and orientations and means of being in the world are reproduced and expanded. If any lives matter, you're going to have major radical democracy. But can you have radical democracy in America without empire, without white supremacy, without male supremacy, without transphobia, without homophobia, without losing sight of the humanity of Muslims and Jews and Arabs? It's an unanswered question. We just don't know. And let's just be honest about it. There's nothing wrong with wrestling with despair the way Jacob wrestled with despair in the 32nd chapter of Genesis. But we can come up with a new name. God restless, with deep wounds, with deep hurts, with new energies. That's where we are now, right on the edge of the cliff with the neo-fascist gangster in the White House. and the milquetoast neoliberals who still vote for his military budget over and over again. AFRICOM expands in Africa. The same ugly policies in Latin America. We've talked about the Middle East. We don't have time to talk about Asia, but that's very important too, with China and all of their forms of domination. What a time to be alive, pandemic and all. And yet, here comes the People's Party. Here comes that same radical democratic tradition that embraces us all. And I come in from the chocolate side of the empire and say, I'm bringing Curtis Mayfield with me. I'm going to bring Sam Cooke with me and Nina Simone with me. Why? Because they provide a structure of feeling and value that provides a ground for a prophetic fight back in the face of this empire collapsing and in the face of the possible regeneration and reawakening of it. Last but not least, at this particular moment, I've got brothers and sisters on both sides. When I listen to Noam Chomsky and Angela Davis, and even my dear brother Bob Ovechkin and brother Carl Dix and others, they say, oh, we agree with the critique of the empire, but we cast a vote for Biden. I say, ooh, I'm not used to voting for milquetoast folk like that. The anti-fascist vote, okay, I do understand. But I hear my dear brothers and sisters on the other side, Chris Hedges, Glenn Ford, Paul Street, Margaret Kimberly, Juma Baraka. I love those folk too. I learned so much from them. They all comrades. They say you can't vote for a neoliberal. You can't vote for the same Biden. You bring such critique to bear. You got to go for Green. You go for Brother Howard. You go for Sister Angela. That debate is a real one. And it ought to go on. And at the moment, I'm leaning with Angela. I'm leaning with Marianne. I'm leaning with Noam Chomsky. But it's not that it makes me that much better. I just believe as part of an anti-fascist coalition, Trump's fascism is one that calls into question the very possibility for any rights and liberties so that all of us could be gone. That's kind of basis that he has. What is it? 1 out of 4 of the folk who support him want to shut down the media. That's the kind of fascist sensibilities. This is Sinclair Lewis. It can't happen here, taking place slowly in real time before our eyes. This is the kind of moment we live in. This is why this movement for People's Party is so fundamentally crucial. And we will resist the same self-righteousness that we get among the neoliberals. We are stepping into the unknown. So what? I come from a people that step out on nothing and still land on something that we helped create based on a love of truth and a love of goodness and a love of beauty. Keep beauty in there. Beauty is very important for empowerment. So I want to bring this to a close. I want to thank you, Brother Nick. And I want to let you know that we've got to make sure that the lifting of the voices become waves all around the country, grounded in the local, but always having a global perspective of the American empire, keeping track of its worst, but also keeping track of the radical democratic tradition that has lodged itself at the center or at the center of the soul of America, but never at the center of American politics. And it has always been multiracial, even though in a certain sense, it's been disproportionately black. That's how deep white supremacy cuts. And you can't have fascism in America without white supremacy being its face. And that's why it's so crucial that all of us attempt to be decent people who have integrity, honesty, and courage, and be willing to enact kenosis, to empty ourselves, to donate ourselves, to sacrifice ourselves for something grander than us, that have everything to do with the best of those who came before and have everything to do with the children yet to come.